why do we do the things we do? You know, it's one of the most complex, maybe the most complex question there is. And today, we're going to dig into it. We're going to uncover a really dangerous mental shortcut that pretty much all of us use, and then find a much, much better way to make sense of the world and each other. All right, to get us started, I've got a little bit of a puzzle for you, one that really gets to the heart of this whole thing. We're going to look at 4 things that seem totally unrelated. Your job is to figure out the connection. So you look at this list, and I mean, they couldn't be more different, right? You've got a totally normal biological process, a life-threatening medical issue, a diet choice, and then, performance-enhancing drugs. What on earth could possibly tie all of these together? And here it is, the answer. It's pretty shocking. Each and every one of these has been part of a successful legal defense to get a lighter sentence for someone convicted of murder. You've probably heard of the famous Twinky Defense, right? Where a lawyer actually argued that his client's diet of junk food diminished his capacity. It sounds crazy, but it proves a really critical point. The stuff that happens inside our bodies can have a huge, huge impact on what we do. Okay, so the world is complicated. Human behavior is incredibly complicated. And because our brains hate complexity, they've come up with this brilliant shortcut to handle it all. But as we're about to find out, that shortcut, it has a really dangerous, sometimes devastating downside. Let's use an analogy to make this super clear. Think about color. In reality, light is just one long, continuous spectrum of wavelengths. There are almost infinite shades. But that's not how we see it, is it? Nope. We chop that reality up into these neat little boxes. We call them red, orange, yellow. And why do we do that? Well, it's just way easier to remember the word blue than to remember a wavelength of 475 nanometers. We take a messy reality and we force it into simple categories. Well, it turns out, we do the exact same thing when we try to figure out why people do what they do. We use this thing that Professor Robert Sapolsky calls bucket thinking. We see a complicated behavior, and we immediately try to drop it into a single, tidy explanation. One bucket. And these buckets, they probably sound really familiar, right? We hear this stuff all the time. Oh, he's just aggressive, it's all that testosterone. Or she's so anxious, it must be a chemical imbalance. Or the big one, it's just in their DNA. We're always reaching for that one simple reason that explains everything. But what happens when that kind of thinking goes way too far? Because here's the thing, this isn't just a harmless little mental quirk. When you get influential people who become completely obsessed with their one favorite bucket, the results can be, well, they can be absolutely catastrophic. Just take a look at this. This quote is from Eugenics Moniz. He won a Nobel Prize for inventing the frontal lobotomy. He lived so completely inside the "it's all about brain wiring" bucket that he believed he could cure people by literally cutting into their brains. He talked about making synaptic adjustments and had the audacity to claim his method had no failures, when in reality it was destroying lives, leaving people as shells of their former selves. And you might think, okay, that's one horrific isolated case. But it's not. Here's another Nobel Prize winner, Konrad Lorenz, a guy who helped found an entire scientific field. He was so deep in the genetics bucket, so committed to that single explanation, that he used his scientific clout to support Nazi ideology, arguing for the extermination of people he considered genetically inferior. So let's just be crystal clear. This is not some harmless quirk. These weren't some fringe quacks. These were celebrated Nobel-winning scientists. And their bucket thinking, their obsession with one single cause, it led to some of the most horrific outcomes imaginable. Okay, so if falling into a single bucket is the trap, how in the world do we avoid it? Now that we've seen just how dangerous it can be, let's talk about a much better, much more powerful way to think about why we do what we do. The key is to stop asking which bucket is it, and instead to look at all of them as a timeline. So you start with the behavior itself. Then you rewind just 1 second before it happened. What were the neurons in the brain doing? Then rewind a little further, a few hours or days. What hormones were sloshing around, changing how those neurons would fire? Then rewind through that person's entire lifetime. How did their childhood, their culture, their experiences shape that brain? And finally, you zoom all the way out to millennia. How did evolution and genetics set the stage for all of it? It's not one answer, it's a whole story. And this, right here, is the real game changer. The single most important takeaway. There are no separate buckets. It's an illusion our brains create for simplicity. In reality, it's all one continuous, interconnected story. You can't talk about a gene without talking about the lifetime of environment that turned it on or off. You can't talk about a neuron firing without talking about the hormones that made it more or less likely to do so. It all flows together. So, I'll leave you with this question. The next time you find yourself trying to explain why someone did something, whether it's a person in the news, a character in a movie, or maybe even someone you love, stop and ask yourself, what's the first bucket I'm reaching for? Is it their childhood, their biology, their personality? And then, what might I be missing? What could I see if I looked at the whole, messy, complicated, continuous story instead?